So let's give John the kind of the use cases that we're working on first, and then we can walk through the demo so he's up to speed.
So if you jump back to your PowerPoint. So what we're looking at is all around package management and which versions are the right versions to use. So we, from the Ortelius side, we know the packages that are broken and what versions they were fixed in. And in Utkarsh's example here, the safe dependency is where the fix is applied, and the latest dependency is obviously the latest one. So our goal is to go to the safe dependency as part of our update process. And the reason for that is to minimize breaking changes. So if you go to the latest one, you have a higher chance of introducing a breaking change. So that's where we're looking at the safe dependency. Now, go ahead and explain your pseudocode here, Utkarsh.
Yeah. So basically, there are like 3 steps. First of all, we are trying to create a dependency set against which we are going to run and build our application and see if that is particular application is running fine. And how like we are trying to get these is basically we can try running with latest dependency, but if we have the CVE reports for all of these dependencies, but I believe Ortelius is already doing so. So it will be like something redundant. So to get the dependency set, we will rely on Ortelius APIs to get for a particular component repository under a component what all dependencies are there, which are safer for that particular repository. But here the challenge was Ortelius is trying to, Ortelius can only tell like this is particular safe dependency for a particular dependency, like for a SQL Alchemy, let's say the latest dependency is 2041. So, and there might be a CVE. So the response that I'll get from Ortelius is to use this particular version, which is 2.0.30. But there might be a possibility because this is the like permutation combination. So the particular version of SQL Alchemy does not go, hand to hand with some version of cryptography. So that is why to evaluate those things, we are going to build our application and try to see if there are any errors on a module side, packaging side. For this, what we have done, we have created a MCP server. It has like a couple of integration as well. For sandbox environment, I'm using this particular integration. One second. Okay. I'm using E2B. We have MCP for this E2B service, which will provide a sandbox environment. This is used for running your small snippet code in an isolated sandbox environment. And for our use case, since the use case is very small, we just want to check out our code, identify what commands that we want to run to see if that particular application is building fine. So we are quickly doing those. And then if we get a success, then that means we can directly create a PR. In that case, the PR can be directly merged to the main code since there are like no breaking changes, no issues with that. But if there is any issue, there might be a possibility we need to notify the developers to migrate their some dependency versions. So they might have to upgrade their Node version or NPM version or .NET version from 14 to 15 because the support was not there, something like that. So in that case, you're going to create an issue for them and notify them. Any questions?
Yeah, so just coming in right in the middle of this, right? So
Mhm.
so in this scenario, there is some code that's going through a pipeline that is making an API call to Ortelius. It is recognizing that it's using SQL Alchemy, Fast API, and cryptography, and then the API. Am I on track so far?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, okay.
Almost, but
Oh,
because the workflow would have already completed, and Ortelius is running, is synchronizing CVEs against
okay.
the version of the SBOM. And so that's where the story starts, is using the Ortelius API to check the dependencies where there's an issue.
All right, so you are at this point, you don't
Post
have an
deployment.
SBOM, but you
We
have,
do.
oh, you do have an SBOM.
We have an
And yet,
SBOM. This is all post deployment. So a build's been done. We have an SBOM. We know where the versions are running because we have the build logs, right? And that's stored in our database. Every 10 minutes we go out and we synchronize against OSV dev looking for post deployment vulnerabilities. Then we get it when they show up, then we get initiated to go back through the process. And what we're doing is testing first before we create the pull request by running the build. And if the build's successful, we create the pull request. If the build fails, we create the issue.
all right, so you have the SBOM based on what the user has selected, right? Or they're using latest.
Whatever came from the CI/CD pipeline
Yeah.
during that build, and if they don't have one, we will generate one using SIFT.
Okay, and then so you will figure out, like, did they specifically set a particular version, or they just use latest, and
We have a versioning engine, so we track and we version every single workflow with all of the configuration information, including the SBOM.
right, but by the time you get to the point where you're creating the SBOM for the user,
Which
you're
is at the build, right?
you're just taking whatever they put in, whether they specifically versioned or they just took latest, right?
Right.
Okay. So
Yeah.
and so okay, and then at that point, the logic is you will check the latest dependency based on the pseudocode. You'll check.
Yeah, all of these things, like in starting, we thought of handling it ourselves, but Ortelius is already doing so. So let's say the application has these current dependencies. So as Tracy was saying, Ortelius will like already identify which all dependencies are safe to be migrated, to be upgraded, and these will be safe from a CVE's point of view.
But I'm trying to just figure out where this happens in the flow. Is this all before you're about to build the SBOM?
It's after. Think about this way after deployment. You've already ran your workflow. It's running in production.
It could be a month later.
It
All
could
right,
be a
got it.
month later. It could be a month later. It could be 6 months later. You've
But
had this application, and we synchronize and we notify. We're
got it.
doing this. Yeah.
I think I'm good. But my point, I guess, is at that point you've built an SBOM based on what they gave you, not what is sort of the safe.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get to.
Whatever
Okay,
the
cool.
SBOM, whatever the SBOM generated at the time
Right,
of
which whether you
deployment.
generate it automatically or whatever, but
Yeah.
it is exactly
Yeah.
what they had. Okay,
Yeah.
so now at this point later, you're running Ortelius to say, hey, we know a lot more about what you're doing. Therefore, we think that depending, like in this case, your current dependency is, so let's just say Fast API, it's 98. You would then go through this logic at that point, check the latest dependency, and say the latest is this. Check the CV for the latest. If the CV exists, look for the
Yes.
safe.
So
Got it. Yeah.
what our goal, our mission here is to help the DevOps engineers as much as possible in identifying high risk and critical dependencies that we could use this to go ahead and update the POM file or the dependency file to the safe dependency.
Got it. And so you got all this, and then the logic is to call the sandbox,
Yeah.
The
right?
sandbox does our own testing, right?
Yeah, I get that. With this point, you're saying, hey, you had current dependency 98. We think right now the safe dependency is 101.2. And by the way, we feel pretty confident that that's the case because we ran a sandbox test.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. All right, good. I just want to
And
make
then
sure.
we put it, we hand it back to him in the pull request.
Okay, yeah, and
So
you
we
did
take the
something
updated file and give it to them in the pull request so that they make a decision if they want to push it forward or not.
right. No, of course you got to do that, right? Because
Yeah,
there might be
yeah,
application dependencies on a certain version.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right. So I get it. No, and so that's where I'm at right now. Now I have a good understanding where we are as we leave this slide.
Good. Okay.
So,
That's
Utkarsh, why don't you
cool.
go
Really
over
awesome, by the way.
go over
Go ahead.
the MCP tools that you're the tool set that you're showing us?
Yeah, so these are the tools that I'm using currently. So I'm using Repomix MCP server because we want to have like a good understanding of that particular repository because technology can vary from one technology to another, and there can be multiple ways of handling the dependencies. So this create a pretty much like consolidated context in very less tokens. And using this context, what will happen? Another tool which will be triggered, which is like GitHub read content. There should be somewhere here. And then we will read content from that particular dependency management file. It can be package.json or requirement.txt or toml file, anything. And then we are going to install those dependencies in that particular sandbox environment and try to see if that particular application is running fine.
Make then standard calls to like, for example, but just that dependency, or do you take you do combined packages, or you're just testing, like for this in case Fast API, the 101 version, you would basically in the sandbox, you'd be setting up the environment, and then you'll execute some sort of test code.
I think the jury's still out on that one, whether it would make sense to throw everything at it all at once. So update all the dependencies to the safe versions. So if we have 3 packages that have safe versions that we need to upgrade to, if we would go and do that update all at once and then try the build, or if we would try number 1 first, see if that builds, then come back and try number 2 with number 1. That's still up in the air.
Okay.
Trying to figure out what's the best solution on that front.
Yeah, I think probably, get the first one working and then you
Yeah.
go up to it. But so then to understand, like, how are you testing? Are you taking the vulnerability or what is the test that ensures the user that this version is going to work?
It's whether it builds and runs.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily tell you whether it's vulnerable or not, right?
Well, we take we know the fixed version, that's the safe version.
Okay.
We make that update in the dependency file, and then we give that over to the build process to see if it builds and runs.
All right, so let me ask dumb, transparent questions. If they or might sound like dumb, maybe not be dumb. But like, wouldn't I during my just normal test development, like know that if so I guess the question is, I was using 98 in my code. You're suggesting I go to 101. You're sort of replicating maybe what they might have tested with 98, but not using their code, but saying, hey, like if using general fast API. But here's, I guess, the complicated question. Like how do you know, like, if there's a certain parameter that they're using or something very specific?
Yeah. So this is going to get us close.
Okay.
So this will get us to a point where we're comfortable with being able, so if everything passes on our side in this sandbox environment, we're going to be good to create the pull request. Now, when you create the pull request on the branch, usually their CI system will go off and build that specific pull request in
Right.
their context of their build system. So it'll, even though we're able to get it to build, it'll get rebuilt as part of the PR.
Because again, here's devil advocate, and then if you guys have specific questions too, we can just jump to that. But if as I'm sort of, as just sort of trying to understand this, I mean, wouldn't the assumption that 98 actually works? And so what is and again, this isn't criticism, these are just sort of transparent questions. Wouldn't the assumption be that that works, given that it's sort of out there and it's
What happens is the transited dependencies for that version will cause it not to work. So even though everybody says it's good to go. So for example, a big time gotcha is we take SQL Alchemy from 17 to 30. And when we go to 30, that the version of cryptography that we want to go to, which would be like 44, won't work.
yes. Okay, I'm sorry, just so we can save time. But that almost mandates that you have to test them in concert, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
that's where we would start with number one, then do 1 and 2, then 1, 2,
Okay,
and
okay,
3.
that's what I was missing. So you do one, then you do 1 and 2, and you 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, and yeah, okay, yeah, totally, that makes sense because it's you're right, the different. I mean, I
Yeah,
run in all the time. Okay, yeah, got it.
and theoretically you could do all the permutations. So whatever.
Right, but the key advantage here is that we want to make sure that we're telling them these are the safe dependencies. This is the way you think you should go, but we don't know for sure if they all work together.
Yeah, and that's why we go through that build process to do the ensure things are working.
We're basically trying to create a bot for what a build person has to go through every time.
No, okay, now I get it. That was part I was missing, is that I was thought you were running them individually and then notifying, but you are sort of incrementally adding them on to say, hey, we got through these 3, they all work together. Good.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, Utkarsh, why don't you just show your your E2B or that screen. So just walk over the prompt real quick.
Okay, so basically this will be abstracted out, but for testing, I'm just passing in the prompt here. So if you see prompt here, I'm just asking the LLM to do like 3-step process, which is cloning the repository and then installing the dependency from dependency management file. It can be requirement.txt or any other dependency management files. And then we have to run that particular application with using a suitable command. And few other notes that because that particular environment doesn't have Docker installed, so I'm just restricting, if LLM is going to invoke these Docker, so then it is going to fail. So that is why. Here it is trying to identify the command by itself. This is where the LLM is coming to picture. Also, it is identifying what file is carrying all the dependency management and versions and all.
Okay.
And yep.
So this is what's driving the sort of the functions or the MCP is this this template for okay, now I know your repository. So I know your repository. Sometimes I just have to baby step this to my own head, right? I know your repository, but I want to try it with these 3 versions, given the 3 examples you have. So go ahead and build this in a sandbox.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay, and you're making basically Yeah, got it. Okay, okay, cool.
Yep, that's pretty much about it.
And then we get the end result is we get information about what happened. See, this one's loading.
While that's loading, I want to give kudos to Utkarsh. Utkarsh, you've been working on this for what, 6 weeks, 8 weeks?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think he's made amazing progress on this.
What was the hardest learning part in all this process for you? Oh gosh.
Yeah, so so the hardest part was there are a lot of tutorials about how you can implement MCP, but
Right.
nobody's talking about how how to be more efficient. So in starting, I was like burning out a lot of credits for my
Okay,
API keys for Anthropic, but now it is so efficient. Like the last top up I did for $5, and it went for a month, and still there is like half of credits remaining.
cool.
So we have
Were you
tried
monitoring through like
documenting.
REST requesty, or were you just capture your own metrics? In other words, what were the things that helped? Were there any particular tools or methods that helped you sort of refine your costs?
Yeah, so there's a mechanism called intent-based um, tooling system, wherein we used a small, cheaper model to identify which all tools we can use.
Okay,
So
okay,
then, yeah, and in turn, it will then use the higher high performant models which are more expensive. So in that case, what will happen at any point, we will only be using the only tools that are required. So if you see at this point, there are more than 51 tools registered, but we don't want to use 51 tools, right? Because what happened in the context, there is a set JSON format for all of these tools. So that is why the context size becomes huge. So as we increase more MCPs, more tools will, uh, get embedded, and then the context window will like exponentially increase.
okay. Let's see, you got sort of a small language model in front of this to basically.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Mhm. What happened here?
Oh, it said max at the bottom. It said max
Yeah, yeah.
something
I'll have to.
reached.
1 second. Let me try this one.
Thought you copied it. No, that's the same one. There it is.
Okay, sorry. Oh, no, that's running. Hmm.
And right now, Utkarsh is using the Anthropic Claude model.
Okay.
So
Okay. Yeah.
just highlight the turns.
Yeah. So basically, I'm going to try like 5 times because this sandbox environment is not so reliable. This is meant for, running your small code snippet for a very, short period of time. But here, if you see, it did like turn one, and then maybe that particular sandbox environment got decommissioned. So that is why something went off, and then it tried turn two. No, sorry, turn one was regarding repo mix. Okay, this was fine. turn to, okay, from here it started, checking out the code into a sandbox environment and trying to run. And then we have turn 3, okay. And then, okay, it is using the same tool ID, right? Okay, it is using the same tool ID. That means that is still there. And then it went in and created the directory for a particular project and then identified what is the particular dependency management file, and then realize what is the main file. It also identified this is a Flask application, and then it will probably try to run that particular command to run that particular thing. And here we see a success. That means it has been started. And here, if you can see, listen to our interface, it has started listening to a particular localhost 5000, and it has not mentioned port somewhere. So yeah, that means we are just interested to see if we are getting success or failure. I'm trying to parse this particular response into much more readable format, something like this,
Nice. Yeah. Very nice. Yeah.
where we just have like some status, all the contextual information in one particular attribute, and then what all tools that particular LLM has since used. Yep, that's pretty much about it.
Cool.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I have just quick question to you, maybe Steve.
Yep.
If there are any integrations and we are, seeing some errors regarding those integrations, can we say our dependencies were fine, and it was not able to, start up because of that particular dependency?
Yeah. So, for example, if that connects out to a database and the database isn't available in this sandbox environment, that would be fine. That the actual execution may not work 100%. So I think just saying that the more important part is the build works
Mm.
than the actual execution. Just because there may be database contexts and stuff like that that aren't available in that world. Does that make sense?
Yep, yep, yep.
And that's pretty common. Most applications run with some
Mhm.
sort of database connection.
Mhm. And maybe another question to John here. So, John, we already have data for millions of repositories on open source, and we kind of know what is this this security score for them because they already have a scorecard integration. So, what I was trying to think here is, if we have those data and we know if a particular dependency set for a particular dependency works, or for the particular application works, so can we use that particular knowledge to before itself we can identify if that particular dependency set will work or not?
Yeah. So let me rephrase your question to see if I have it correct. If we know that there's another project out there in the open source world that's using SQL Alchemy 2030,
Yeah.
that we can go take a peek at that and see how it had all the dependencies configured to cheat. Is that the correct interpretation, Utkarsh?
Yeah, but how it would work is basically we would extract data from those repository. So let's say the minor patch version can be different, right?
Yeah.
Because patch versions, I don't think there is a lot of issue regarding this patch version, because but if a particular application is already using a combination of these, and major version and let's say minor version is same, and so we can directly go ahead and say this particular dependency set will work fine.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see how we would find that information across all those millions of repositories. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
That would be the interesting part, because you'd need to know the package, the dependency information, and whether that dependency was included in a successful build and deployment.
Yeah, the other problem that you have a little bit, I was thinking about this anyway, which is, I mean, a lot of um, implementers and developers are pretty lazy about their sort of requirements files, right? Like, in other words, especially like in all the stuff I'm seeing in AI, when people are building, they're cutting and pasting like everything in the kitchen sink in a requirements file.
Yeah,
And so that seems to like, so that's just a problem in itself to be able to sort of strip that down to the ones that are only being used. But then if you went out and
Yeah, I
scanned,
think yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I think the approach the other approach that we were discussing in the last call is we are going to reverse engineer the build artifacts and try to identify what is the software build of material from there.
yeah, that's good because then yeah, I guess if you go back to SBOM, then it makes sense, right? It's like, for example, if you're identifying the SBOM from what actually is being used in the code as opposed to what's set up in the sort of the dependency files, then you
Yeah.
yeah, that's the tricky part because things package managers like Python and Node, the npm and Yarn don't go and strip out. They just get if you put the whole kitchen sink in there, they do no pruning when you go and do the deployment. Where like Golang will drop dependencies for you and minimize your footprint, which is a much more
Okay.
efficient way to do it. But we're some of these languages are just not very good at that.
But you could know. I mean, I guess the assumption would be at some point, or do you know based what's actually used in the code?
You don't. You have to instrument the code and
Okay.
Yeah.
But then
go that route.
I mean, that would be a really interesting. Well, like maybe assumption some of the other older languages will eventually do it, but I don't think so, like Golang. But that would be sort of really interesting. But yeah, because then you run into, I think, the same problem you've identified, Steve, which is if I go look at millions of repositories, like how do I really know what they're using?
Yeah.
And I don't, so therefore my efficacy of you know, like of trying to give people, I guess, something about I think there's something interesting about the scoring.
Yeah.
Doing some analysis across the board on you know, probability or, a scoring or something. If,
Oh, that's a good idea.
if
A
nobody else is doing
probability
that.
score of how this is, what our confidence level of this patch.
Yeah. And like you could be leaders in that space too, especially as these sort of libraries, it's just going to get crazier, as you all know, right? Like, especially with, sort of, I hate to use the V word, but like more and more stuff is just going to get sort of templated.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think somebody like that idea of going, if you've already got some knowledge of all that and you've already could grab all that stuff, just helping people guide them and like, hey, the probability score of like here's a good example. Like you go out and you have some sort of scoring aggregate and reasonable knowledge of everything and a little sort of like a chat bot that says, hey, I'm going to use these four, libraries pretty heavily, right?
Yeah.
What's the most likely, you know, combination of these? I don't know, something like that could be like, seems like you're already in that ballpark, so that could be it.
I'll have to look. I've seen some of that on some of the registries, so like nodejs.org, I think has some of that.
Okay, okay.
Like this package has been downloaded a million times in the last 3 days, type of thing. So there may be some
But using the
information.
scoring, I think is it was Utkarsh said, like that idea of like using the scoring as might be an interesting
Yeah.
sort of alternative way, right? Like, yeah. Anyway, it sounds like an interesting idea. I think you're right. The idea of like using it as a determinant would be probably way too much work and have a lot of.
Yeah. So here's a question for you, John, real quick. So how we know there's millions of repositories out there in GitHub that have information that could be helpful to us. How would we get access to that information? What would be the best way to get access to that information without building an LLM ourselves with that data? Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like in other words, well, I mean,
All this data is in GCP, and we have to write a BigQuery to fetch those information. But like it becomes really challenging to to make that data available for training our model, or doing some kind of transformation over that particular data.
Yeah, that's what I was worried about. Because I know we could go off and say here our training model, go chug through 350 million repos and pull out what you want, what we need, and then use that to train the LLM. Just super costly.
yeah, it's going to be
Yeah.
real costly and brittle, and I think you're in, a scary race,
Yeah.
But
That's why I was curious if there's another way to go about looking at that
I think
information.
so. I have a group that I worked with. They were open context, and and they went out of business. The But it's not the open context. Let's see if these guys are still there. They're not the same guys. Somebody's already grabbed the. Well, anyway, and there's
Do you know of anybody that's done a model against like GitHub?
I do not. I do not. I know that
I wasn't sure if like what was it? Copilot would have done something.
well, surely they do. Yeah, I mean, they like so they all have, right? The big guy, the big, that that's kind of how they. But their model is more about. I think that that core, it's the code, right?
Right.
And then, so Gemini, the OpenAI, they all of those, have incredible deep context about probably everything that's open on those models have been trained
Yeah.
on just all that code. So they do have an unbelievable. You know what might be interesting? You could literally take this is kind of cool. I forget there's a term for it, and I'm starting to get old and forget the names of things. But the way DeepSeek created their model was there's a term for what they use, but they literally just ran inferences against the GPT models to build their model.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know. It'd be an interesting experiment, instead of thinking I do think honestly, I think that you could spend ridiculous amount of money trying to like build your own sort of model from all the public repos and then get clobbered because somebody else did it with like way more funding, right?
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, and again, this is just wondering if you could sort of build some inferences at scale to learn from the models that they have to pull the things you wanted to know.
Right.
Like kind of like what DeepSeek did to build that. DeepSeek, the narrative there, the Chinese group is they actually supposedly built their model from this running like massive amount of inferences. Now they're trying to solve a generalized, I want to answer everything question.
Right.
The cost for you might be not as costly if you went against like, like tried out Gemini and tried out and just like did some prototyping on like let me ask sort of general questions about the knowledge of the things that you guys want to know about and how
Yeah.
much you know, and maybe there's an opportunity to sort of scaffold from their knowledge to build your models.
Yeah. And then the other question is, what would it buy us if we go through all
Well,
this work? If we go through all this work and it buys us 1%, it's a lot of work for 1% improvement.
I think there's two things. One, I think like doing probability scoring from like just analyzing the sort of general scoring of repositories. It is an interesting idea, and I'm not sure anybody's done that. And that's right in your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
So that's across sort of all, all package managers. And then so that's an interesting way to see where what's the sort of the gravity and traction of that to build onto. Because then if you see the gravity going there, then maybe you can figure out what can we do a little bit deeper here. And I think the other thing, I mean, again, I feel like I'm not telling you guys things you already know, but like on what you're doing with the sandbox, I think there, the more you could sort of lean on non-determinism versus deterministic to save yourself cycle time and token cost, or not really, or just sort of build costs,
Right.
right? Like, and then a way to sort of figure out like, do I really need to look at all the requirements here for this? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
this what I can do then is for the package managers that don't, sort of get rid of the packages aren't. So I like again in summary, right? One, I like the idea of looking at the safety scoring and building out some sort of probability tool to help people better find their way. Now the other thing you're gonna have now too, right? You're gonna have a lot of non-coders who are gonna be coding.
Right.
Right. And so there's going to be a big gap between the sort of the sort of the people who were really close to being coders now are probably going to be coding more significant tools. So the more help you can give them in that regard, I think becomes real powers. And then I love the build idea you have, but like again, the two tricks there is how do I do that as efficient as possible, and can I arbitrage probability versus determinism as sort of an optionality for the use case.
Right.
I don't know if that all makes sense what I just said, but yeah.
Yeah, so John, this is the data that I was talking about. So there is already a scoring tool which is a scorecard, which assess your yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I think, but I think like, yeah, the OSSF stuff. I think, boy, I mean, like, if you've got some bandwidth, I think that would be, I think this would be incredibly. I think you could turn this into. I'd want to find out what is Google still sort of controlling OSSF, or is that sort of completely divorced now, or do we know?
I think it's pretty independent now.
It is okay.
Well, I mean, to an extent, Google is still putting a lot of money into. Are you talking about OpenSSF, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they control all of the cash that comes in for Alpha Omega.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of money coming in for the Chain Guard folks and Sigstore.
Okay.
But they're trying to be more independent. I'm on the board, so I hear, I see what's happening.
Sure.
But Google still has a very, very strong influence over it, I have to say.
I guess the reason I ask that question is I think you're onto something here with this. I think making, the scorecard is one of those things like the Mark Twain. It's everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it, right? Like it seemed to me like adding some real value to this in terms of like turning this into sort of better consumption of knowledge.
Well, and we already consume the scorecard values. So we take the inside of Ortelius, we take the SBOM that we do everything with, and we actually report for every single package that a complete application consumes, regardless of the number of containers in it, all of the packages and their scorecard value.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
from an application perspective, you can see, because what OpenSSF does for the scorecard is there's a page you can go to, and you can enter the link, and then you put the project name at the end, and it'll give you the scorecard value for that particular package or project. But obviously, if you have a couple of hundred packages, you can't do it for every one. So we gather it and aggregate it based on the SBOM.
Yeah,
I'm
and
doing a
so
talk on that at OpenSSF
oh,
Community
wow.
Days.
Well, a safe to fail might be, like this wouldn't be like to build like a sort of a chat bot like interface to allow have a natural language conversation with it so that people could literally sort of learn a little bit more and then think about angles of like how would you sort of help? I mean, all right, now to go all in marketing, I will use the full V word, but think about I think in meta, right? So like you guys put your fingers on keyboards every minute. I don't. But I think in meta, and so what I think about what's going on with vibe coding is all the sort of disconnects are gonna first, you're not gonna stop it. You can scream and holler about how terrible it is, doesn't matter, it's happening. So then the question then is, could a tool, because one of the arguments I've been making, in longer term is I really am starting to think that a Google end-to-end might be the best solution for enterprise because not just the fact that I think Vertex is way better than Bedrock, or that the Gemini models are as good as anybody else's, or like you look at like all the things they're doing with GCD, but then you add in the fact that they are investing in things like OpenSSF and even Dora to a certain extent is now starting to research. And they have this holistic package. So I think these intangibles like OpenSSF and things are going to become important parts that people will wake up to. Like, okay, now I'm generating, now I've got, all right, so I'm rambling, but like the sort of this Jevons paradox, right? Everybody thinks that like this OpenAI and vibe coding and Cursor and all these things are going to get rid of developers. History has sort of shown that like if you've got probably 5,000 developers, you might have now 15,000 developers. They'll just not be doing the same development, you know. So again, I'll stop my ranting, but what I would think is you all being able to create that kind of knowledge very consumable to an idea that there are going to be a lot more people coding who don't even know, a tenth of what we've just talked about over the last 30 minutes. And how can we help them?
Yeah.
So there are like so many repositories and they have like a good scorecard values.
Yeah.
So we can utilize those information to, find out what is a good combination.
Yeah, I mean, just vectorize this stuff and then see what kind of answers you can get from just general questions out of it. Seems like
Yeah, with all the commits, there's what, 63 million or 6.3 million? 6.3 million.
yeah, this would be I just thinking about like the way I'm trying to think about how well, I've been very much thinking like, dear CIO, like how can we take the things we know and the things we don't know, and how can we make sure we don't run into this like these technical debt, I call it technical debt tsunamis, but I mean they're technical debt, can't
Yep.
get out. You're stuck and you can't work your way back, right? Like there's like a worse term than tsunami, which is like, it's one of those things where you've gone in and now you can't get back out.
Yeah. What is that? 39 million or 36 million?
169 million.
That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. That interface right there. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's all the commits for every single repository. That's interesting. That's good to know. We can get to that data raw.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I could tell you something you should do. Like, all right, I'm just going to throw ideas at you. But Mary Mika just did. She did a report on Friday, which everybody's already rambling about. Even CNN's talking about it, right? And they showed a lot of stats of things that have increased. But like just like just that right there. Like, if you could sort of, I don't know if you have any historical data, but like show what. Well, I mean, there's a very high level. Like, there's been more GitHub projects added or something like that. But you could literally write some articles around, like, let me show you what's really going on here. You know what I mean? terms of, like build on top of Mary Meeker's thing, about, hey, yeah, Mary Meeker's a really report, but let me show you some real data of what's been happening over the last year.
Yeah.
That, again, that funnels promotion to your project, gets more people looking at it, they're more interested in what's going on. Could create a deeper discussion about safety.
All right. Well, thank you everybody
Yeah.
for the discussion. I got to jump to another meeting. Awesome job, Utkarsh. Looking
Yes,
good.
Utkarsh, thank you so much.
Great.
And just so I think everybody on this call, I sent an invite during CDCon. We're going to do a CI/CD cybersecurity focus group. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in my laptop and set up a Zoom meeting. Andrea Fertoli, who's the chair of the TOC, will be on there. Utkarsh, Jane, Sasha, Tony, who's already left. So I sent you all and John. I've sent you all invitations to that. So you could potentially join via the Zoom meeting. We'll have to figure out a mic to make it work, but we'll sort that out as we get there and do the best we can.
Fun stuff. You guys are doing really great stuff. So it sounds pretty exciting. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just one last thing to everybody. Kate and Jude were able to get a little bit of funding out of the CDF for the CI/CD cybersecurity SIG that we've been sort of directing and encouraging. So that's good news. The board is starting to look at what we're doing.
Nice.
Take care, y'all. Thanks.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Thank you.
Great
All right,
job.
cheers. Bye.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.